Hi, HRN listeners. We're celebrating our 15th anniversary, and we have a really fun campaign and an ask for you. This 15th anniversary tour is aiming to bring you closer to unique food and music experiences in some of the most exciting cities in America. All the while, we're raising funds to support our work empowering the next generation of food systems storytellers through our fellowship programs. Here's how it works. Donate to HRN and be entered into a raffle in the city of your choice to win a dinner for two at a noteworthy restaurant and tickets for two to a concert at a prominent local venue. We have incredible partners in New York, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Nashville, Las Vegas, Charleston, Asheville, and Ardmore, Pennsylvania, who have donated a meal for two and two tickets to a concert of the winner's choice. And all donations help fund our fellowship programs, where we're helping to build essential workforce readiness skills and food system storytelling skills. Check out heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. That's heritageradionetwork.org/15. Thank you.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network. HRN is food and beverage radio supported by you. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org.
This episode is brought to you by Roberta's, home of Heritage Radio Network since 2009. Learn more about Roberta's at robertaspizza.com.
So you don't charm the devil with your rock and roll load. Knows that country music's gonna save your soul. The devil runs his groove in them rhythm and blues that sound. It's gonna get you started in the end.
Welcome back to The Speakeasy. I'm Damon Boelte.
And I'm Sother Teague. Hey, buddy.
Hey, my friend.
Just me and you this week. No Greg.
Yeah.
He's having Wi-Fi issues, I guess.
Yeah, air quotes. Wi-Fi issues. He's still sleeping.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Hungover.
He's young, you know.
Yeah.
So we found out some cool, there's a lot going on right now, Sother, out in our world, in our industry. And, Tales is right around the corner. We're nominated again for the Spirit Award for Best Broadcast, which we're super excited and honored to be part of that again, of course. And like you've said before, it's like, you don't even care if we win this, because if we keep getting nominated, that's kind of cooler, because as soon as we win it, we're not eligible to win that award, or anyone who wins a certain award in any category, actually. You're not eligible to win it again for 5 years or something like that?
5 years. You're not even eligible to be nominated again. So certainly I see both sides, right? If we take it home, that's a big honor, and maybe that'll get more sponsors or some looks for us from, for Heritage Radio, et cetera. But I think being up on the marquee every year has been very advantageous for us. Again, I jokingly always say, like, I don't even remember who won 5 years ago. Of course I do. It was Eric Castro from Bartender at Large. I don't even remember who won 5 years ago, but everyone remembers us because we're up there every year. You know what I mean?
That's right.
So, but maybe it's time we go ahead and get it, right? We've been nominated every year the category has existed. So that's
right.
It's a hell of a streak.
Yeah, right? For sure. And actually, someone who's a friend of our show, actually, that used to work with you, just won a really insane award that I didn't even know was a thing until I heard it earlier today. But Austin Henley won. Tell me again what the award was.
Yeah, the Michelin Award is called the Exceptional Cocktails 2023 Award. He won it because he's out at Cato. We've talked to him on the show about Cato. I've been to the restaurant a couple of times when I've been out there working on the project we're doing out there. I feel like I'm no, soothsayer, but I feel like I saw this coming. I know the awards are coming to that place. It is incredible. The program that he's running is so thoughtful and intentional. And so deep and rich. Really excited for him to take this home. I didn't know this category existed. I just thought they were going to go up a star. They did not. Cato maintained its 1-star status, but I think that's because of the move. They moved from a location that didn't have a bar at all. That's when Austin got on board and ran the bar. They had 1 star from that old location. I think it takes a couple of years to dig into your space before you can climb the ladder, but they are gunning hard for a 2nd star. And I feel pretty confident that they're going to get one next year. And I also feel like we're all going to see Austin's name all over all kinds of award ceremonies as time clicks by, because the things he's doing out there are just, so forward thinking, so cutting edge. And again, so thoughtful and intentional towards the guest and service. It's just gorgeous. I couldn't be more proud of the guy. He and I worked together for a long time in Amori Margo, and to see him go on and do stuff like this is just it's really heartwarming for me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the last thing that I saw of his of notoriety was when he and I were on the Food Network late at night, about 4:00 in the morning, at Extra Fancy, eating patty melts, and we had glitter all over our faces. What a guy!
I feel like the glitter probably had something to do with Julie Renee.
That's right.
His lovely wife. But yeah, again, couldn't be more proud of him. And,
For sure.
This just speaks to the notion of like awards that, we all take them with, I do, and I think you do. We try and take them with a grain of salt. They're just a good affirmation of work well done from your peers and colleagues. And they do drive business. So you can't ignore that part either. But I don't think any of us go out there trying to win awards. We go out there trying to do what we want to do and doing it well and doing it the way we want to do it. And if we get recognized for it, then all the better. But again,
Sure.
couldn't be more proud of this guy for this one. Michelin is, I mean, we talk about Tales of the Cocktail, but like Michelin and Beard, those are the big boys,
Right. They're, for our industry being as big as it is, it's like, it's more of a consumer recognized accolade, I would say, with James Beard awards and Michelin stars and things like that. So, it's one thing to say you have, and not discounting Tales of the Cocktail or BCB or any of these other things, because we still obviously love them. And with Tales of the Cocktail being the biggest one, it's still not necessarily that well known as far as your general consumer goes. So yeah, it's cool that the category is opening up across these kind of more culinary driven organizations.
Yeah.
So yeah,
sure.
Congrats, Austin. Well, hey, you know what? We've known Austin for a long time. You guys work together. We've got someone in the studio that I used to work with.
Yeah.
A long time ago as well. Although this kid never seems to age.
That's true.
Well, yeah, it's all the tropical drinks, right? They keep you young, I think is what it is. Yeah. But we got a book in the mail recently. Well, you got yours handed to you, but for me, it got shipped out to me in California, and I've been really enjoying this book. I think it's something that is very old and new at the same time, and that's something that kind of needed to happen with this specific drinks category of tropical drinks, which we'll get into with our guests. But we'll go ahead and welcome them in right now. We have Garrett Richard and Ben Schaefer. Welcome back to the show, guys. And it seems like you've been really busy with the new book, Tropical Standard, Cocktail Techniques and Reinvented Recipes. Very cool book. Congrats on this. And welcome back to the show.
Yeah, it's great to be back on the Speakeasy. And I think it's Ben's first time on the Speakeasy, right, Ben?
That is. I don't even know the password, but I will speak easy.
That's right. We've talked about you being on the show a lot in the past. It's just, I guess this would be the first time. So welcome, and then welcome back, Garrett.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, I guess obviously we're going to dig into the book over the course of the show here, but I think the first question I would ask is like, Ben, you've been writing and doing a lot of stuff in that sphere for a long time, and you had some ties with the Dead Rabbit and all the writing that you did for those guys. How did you two tell us how you two sort of joined forces to make this book, and then we'll talk about the book itself.
Yeah, well, you mentioned how Garrett is ageless.
It is true.
I met him when he was even younger than he is now. In fact, he I think was just about to turn 21, and at that time he was yet to become a bartender, but he was a bartender. He was he was an obsessive home bartender, and was about to burst from the chrysalis. So I've known him before history began, and was always impressed with his thoughtfulness about cocktails. And so and followed him all these years when he was with you, Damon, at Prime Meats and all of his different projects. And when the pandemic shut down everything that we held near and dear, and closed existing conditions where he was working, which in my opinion was really the best bar program in New York at that time, we thought, well, let's do something with our time. Let's do a book. Let's do a book about all the different pop-ups that Garrett had done over the years, his Exotica pop-ups, which had kind of really begun as a Prime Meats thing, I think we can say, and then went on for many years at the Rains Law Room and Slowly Surely. But in fact, that isn't the book we did, because of course Garrett had learned so much more in the even in those couple of years since he had done Exotica, when he was working with Dave Arnold at Existing Conditions, etc. So essentially, this whole book is really from scratch. It's a lifetime of thoughts, but it's also things that were brand new. So just like you said, old and new, it's about looking at the history of tropical drinks, the history of craft cocktails, but it's also trying to do things with them that are a little bit different and can go into a little different flavor and texture directions.
Yeah, I think the original conversation Ben and I had was to do sort of like, I think Ben was considering doing these like small books on different parts of New York cocktail culture, kind of like those books that you have about records, like the 33 and a third books.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah. And, he tasked me with, write a couple thoughts down, couple drinks, and, that'll be the book. And then, when I started thinking about like what I wanted to talk about and what was important, I started sketching an outline, and the outline was very focused on technique. And it ended up that, I gave the outline to Ben, and we were looking at it and we realized it was like a 250-page book instead of this small little pamphlet on what I was doing at Exotica. And really the original outline, the crux of it was technique. And then we realized in just reading it that was really a space that hadn't been occupied yet by tropical drink books. I mean, Jeff Berry's work is very historical. Martin Cate's book is very rum focused, but there wasn't anything that necessarily told people, what are the mechanics of flash blending? How can you make a syrup or a cordial with integrity? How can you use a blender properly and, have it be consistent, time from drink to drink? And once we knew that was the angle that we wanted to take, and that there was really a large story to tell because there was old and new techniques to talk about, the book came into focus, and we were really excited by it, even in the midst of being stuck in our apartments.
Right. So basically you're saying from there the book just wrote itself. How nice.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there was very little we cut from that initial outline. There were a couple of drinks I had to create to demonstrate certain techniques that were in that original outline that were just like the technique was there, but there wasn't an example drink. So it's kind of cool because I kind of continued my pop-up and cocktail creations during the pandemic, but they were just for the book. Like instead of doing them at a menu at Rains or Existing, they just existed in the book instead, which was pretty cool to premiere like certain recipes. Cause I think rarely as bartenders we do that. If we put something in an article, it's usually like been given to a guest or at least somebody you work with, right?
Right. You've had somebody's been your test and your control, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, to me, that's just seems like it was like obviously done out of necessity just to get the information out there. And this book goes so much deeper than, you talk about acid adjusting in here, and like, to me, it's just the technique of acid adjusting is becoming more and more kind of standardized and kind of employed in more cocktail bars, right? You're seeing it so much more, but you'd see it in like Liquid Intelligence maybe, but it hasn't been in other books, especially something where you're talking about old and new. And when I was like flipping through this book for the first time, it really made me think about what started happening like 20 years ago in New York, right? We all had to like understand, nail the history of the classics before we could start riffing on them. And then people started doing it because it was like, oh, cool. Well, I'm going to change out this vermouth for, Pinot de Charente, or I'll add the Amaro to it, or whatever, it might be. But we had to show that we respected the classics first, and that we understood them and the history and the technique before we could expand on them. And so that's what this book is to me personally. And it is really interesting too, because take that back 20 years, but then go 100 years ago, and that's when a lot of these drinks were being invented. So it was essentially like a 200-year riff on an old punch. It's like kind of crazy when you think about like the way that these were understanding the actual ingredients going in and the technique, and it's kind of cool that it's almost like cyclical, but this is like the most advanced version of that history of mixed drinks, in my opinion. So it's just fun too. I mean, like being able to, like, tropical drinks are fun. They're meant to be fun and kind of like escapism,
Yeah, there's supposed to be an accessibility, I think, with this genre. There's certain other ones, like I'm sure, Sother, you see this. There's like sort of like the training wheels and the building up you have to get to with Amaro-based cocktails. But like ideally, there should be, if you're serving these types of drinks, there should be like an immediate like recognition of what the ingredients taste like, what even your thoughts are, and like what your platonic ideal is of something like a Mai Tai or strawberry daiquiri or whatever, even if that thought is not necessarily accurate, But
yeah, a little bit lower barrier entry to get people over the hill, right?
Yeah, but I think with that comes a challenge, because there's so many expectations of what some of these classics are supposed to be, and how they're supposed to be served, and that really goes to what Damon was talking about. Is it was important for us, I think, with some of these recipes to sort of show the layers of time that some of these recipes have gone through, and show things that were related to some of these recipes. Because I think sometimes with tropical and faux, tropical and tiki drinks is you can kind of get in this box where you only look at that. But like, Ben and I tried to point out contemporary, cocktails that were related to certain recipes, or even things related 70 years prior. The swamp water cocktail influencing things like chartreuse swizzle later in the in the century. There's a lot of examples of that, right, Ben? Of like sort of the layers of time.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the genius of, Garrett, of your recipes is that we're looking at historical drinks, but we're not just kind of swapping out something and saying, this Manhattan is now a different drink because we changed it to different Amaro or something. The point is, I think what Garrett does so brilliantly is he tries to figure out the intent of the originator of these drinks, right? So he's, you can't just take the 1944 Trader Vic Mai Tai recipe and make it, because those things don't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want something that tastes like maybe that did, you have to maybe get there a different way. And I think that's a big issue for me, is that I think any kind of cocktail creation, when you're doing historical drinks, it's always a reinterpretation, because you're working with different tools, right? The rums are different, the spirits are different, the produce is different, even sugar is different, everything's different. So you have to kind of have an understanding of what the intention was, which I think Garrett is really great at. So the book it's some of the recipes are very close to what they might have been when they were originated. Some of them are quite different, but the intention is to capture what that experience would have been like as it was known then. Except for, of course, where Garrett has drinks completely of his own that are pushing the boundaries in new ways. But we're not trying to say, for example, we talk about the daiquiri because you can't not talk about the daiquiri. It's,
right.
One of the best understood drinks, but it's still not understood enough, right? Because there's always more to know. And I think the recipe that we present is, it's not a new recipe. We're basically doing, a pretty standard daiquiri, except we wanted to make a big point that people should try it with granulated sugar rather than syrup, which of course is the original way that it was made. But I think you have to understand that in order to understand that's a technique now. When does sugar come into play versus syrup? That's a technique that can help you understand 1,000 other drinks, right? So that's where I think the importance of what Garrett says, that even though we have these brilliant recipes, and even though these recipes you could drink for years and enjoy all of them, the real point is the techniques behind them that open up the whole world of bartending, not just 84 recipes in our book, but any recipes you want to do, I think, can be informed by these techniques.
Yeah, and like for the example with the daiquiri, the problem with it, the sugar version, is that the sugar never really dissolves. And the modern technique that we picked up from was from my friend Daniele Della Poya, who owns Exotico in Miami. And he was using, back when he was in Bologna, Italy, he was doing milk frothers to melt sugar into cocktails. And I was like, that's a really good idea. And it should be done for the daiquiri. And, once you bought that like $10 milk frother off of Amazon, it was really easy to do sugar daiquiris, and we do them behind the bar at Sunken Harbor Club. And then, once you know that little hack, you can then make whiskey sours that way, or Tom Collins is that way. And we've seen people use the milk frother outside of just the recipe that we've told them to use it for, which I think was a big sticking point for us for the book, was to have a lot of these recipes and syrups and techniques be like a jumping off point that then once someone understands that, like the xanthan gum hack that we use for the frozen drinks, like then you can just apply those to other recipes that you're doing, other stuff that you're doing behind your bar, and have it be more of a conversation.
Sure, applied learning and also sort of the teach a man to fish sort of ethos, right? I mean, I think that's incredible, and I think that your particular trail and travels through the bartending world, put you in a great position to really kind of reevaluate this whole canon of style of drinking and apply some of these techniques that we have today that simply didn't exist when these drinks were made. Simple things like acid adjustment that can change the world of tropical drinks because they so overwhelmingly involve juices that then you can really dial in so you can have a standardized product at the end of the day, but also just a more impactful flavor. I think it's pretty incredible.
That to me is the number one. If people only take one thing away from this book, I really think the acid adjusting is the most powerful technique. It's so simple. All you're doing is adding a little citric and malic acid powder to juice, right? But it unlocks those flavors, as you've said, so powerfully. I mean, if you do nothing else in your life, everyone should be doing acid adjusted juice. And there is a lot of confusion about, there's different ways to do it, and people talk about super juice, but I think we've explained in a very simple way what the real purpose of juice is, which is really to enhance the acidity of non-lemon and lime juices like grapefruit, orange, pineapple that aren't really sweet enough to be the sweet part. They aren't really acidic enough to be the acid. They need to to fall into place, and acid adjusting does that. And then you have a tropical drink where you might have multiple juices. You can have one juice that has the flavor you want and the acidity you want. It really changes the game. You have a more direct flavor. I mean, everyone should be doing this every minute of their lives, in my opinion.
Yeah, we're forcing the orange and grapefruit to get their act together because most of the time they're not pulling their weight in cocktails.
Right? They have too great a water content versus their acid content, right?
Yeah,
but I also
they're
really,
just lazy.
I'm also really intrigued and love the fact that you've taken some time to dedicate to the opposite of that, right? Like, everybody's keen on acid adjustment, but you've also dialed into sugar adjusting the bricks on juices as well. And I think that's something we did at, Booker and Dax. You guys did it, XCon, and like it really makes a difference. And again, not incredibly difficult to do.
I was just going to say everyone should do acid adjusting.
Yes,
everyone
right
should
now.
do it.
Do it right now. Right now.
Yeah.
Don't eat the brown acid.
The sugar, aka bricks adjusting, it does take a little bit of math, and you do need a little bit of equipment. It's not expensive equipment.
Sure.
But again, the power of that is significant.
It's cool because if you're presented, especially if you're working in like a restaurant bar situation, if you're presented with like seasonal fruit, seasonal citrus, like something like blood orange, pomelo, what have you. You could juice it for service. You could muddle the fruit for service and have it for, a couple of days, or you can turn it into a syrup that could last a month, and then you can run a special with it. And, for a home bartender, that's even more impactful because, if you say to a home bartender, for this recipe, you need raspberries, like the raspberries may not last until they have time to make the cocktail at home. And if you actually know how to turn it into a syrup that works just as well as simple syrup, and it's a 1-to-1 swap, then you already know how to use that syrup. That was a big lesson from Don Lee. The first time he was training us at Existing, is he was like, there's so many ingredients in craft cocktail bars that don't operate like the ingredients you already know how to use. And he's like, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you try to calibrate these things so that then you have more freedom to, move stuff around. And, that made a lot of sense to me.
I think that's one of the crucial things. I mean, again, that's the idea that the techniques open up a whole world for you. The fact that things are can be swapped in and out, that's what brings them the power, right? If you know your syrups are all going to be at 50 or 66 bricks or whatever you want them to be, if you know your juices are all going to have the acidity of lemon or lime or where you want them to be, then you can swap them out for each other, right? And you can try new things because they're going to play the same role in acid or in sugar because you've calibrated them. And I think that's just so brilliant because people are always, those are some of the issues you deal with when you're making a new drink. How do you balance it? In a way, if you use these techniques, the balance is kind of part of it.
Right. You're dialing it in and you're creating like a standardized sort of weight of the hammer that you're using, right?
Yeah.
to really stretch for an analogy there.
I think it's really important for a cocktail like the Brown Derby, for instance. Like it's grapefruit, honey, right? It's like you always have to like throw some lemon juice in it or something just to like make it work right. So like acid adjusting the grapefruit would make a ton of sense. But
that's one of the drinks Garrett handles. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, Sother was going to say that we need to take a quick commercial break. Let's do that, hear from our sponsors, and get back in the studio talking with Garrett Richard, Ben Schaefer from Tropical Standard. Back in a few.
This episode is brought to you by Roberta's, home of Heritage Radio Network. Roberta's was founded in Bushwick in 2008 and has become one of the most iconic restaurants in the country. HRN made its home inside of Roberta's in 2009, and together they have become part of the DIY fabric of the neighborhood. Roberta's is open for lunch and dinners 7 days a week and serves much more than just the famous wood-fired pizzas. Their team dreams up new salads, pastas, and sandwiches on the regular. Roberta's Tiki Bar is alive and well in the back garden, serving up frozen drinks in the summer and hot toddies in the winter. Stop by the bakery and takeout spot next door for fresh breads, sticky buns, and pizzas to go. But Roberta's also extends beyond Bushwick, with multiple locations in New York City, Long Island, and Los Angeles. You can also find their frozen pies in grocery stores around the country. The spirit of Roberta's, like Heritage Radio Network, is everywhere. Here's to many more years of pizza-powered radio. Learn more about Roberta's at robertaspizza.com.
And we are back. You're listening to The Speakeasy on Heritage Radio Network. In the studio today, we have our friends Garrett Richard and Ben Schaefer from the book Tropical Standard. So, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of really great recipes in here and modern takes on some kind of classic techniques and just kind of like modernizing some of these old ideas of what tropical drinks are. And one thing that I really love about this, I'm the design guy of the group. So, flipping through this book, there's not one ceramic tiki style mug that's all in glassware and they're beautiful.
Yeah, that's great. I didn't even notice that. That's amazing.
Yeah. One thing I always say about drinks is like if you're coming up with a drink, make sure it's pretty because it's the first thing people are going to notice. Like as far as all your senses go, when it comes to food, it's olfactory because you can smell the food before you ever see it. When it comes to drinks, most of the time, the first way you perceive it is through your vision, right? So got to make sure they're beautiful. And I feel like Sother, wasn't it something we've talked about before? Like a lot of the old kind of tiki drinks, they were served in those opaque ceramic mugs to kind of cover up some bad, not so desirably looking.
Yeah, I was going to ask Garrett that. I didn't notice. I looked at the book. I didn't notice that there were no tiki mugs in there. But that's just not the type of thing I would notice. But is it myth or is it mythology that the mugs were often there to kind of hide the somewhat muddy nature of a lot of the cocktails so that, you didn't have to actually see the drink, which you guys are certainly disproving in this book. Now I'm flipping through it and I don't see any of that. So it's gorgeous.
I'm sure there is some practical use of that, of the mug to hide certain colors. But to me, I think mugs are there, at least in contemporary bars, I think they're there to hide improper flash blending technique. I think if you look at some of the older places that are still around, like Tiki Tea, the Maikai, which is reopening soon, they are also mostly glassware. The Maikai has, one or two mugs, but mostly glassware. Don the Beachcomber's early menus, all glassware, all Depression era glassware, very specific designs, which we go into in Tropical Standard. And I think when I was thinking about styling the book, I had already been collecting a lot of glassware. And I wanted to lean in on that idea because I think when you flash blend something properly, you really can see like layers of ice. You can see foam on the top, which is very hard to photograph, by the way. You have to really get your timing done right. But you get foam on the top. You have multiple layers of ice because the Hamilton Beach is breaking up some of that ice on the bottom, and then you have some whole ice on the top. But I mean, Ben and I had a lot of fun going into some of those older glassware manufacturers and seeing, where some of those designs come from. Like Ben, we should talk about, where we found the name for the Pearl Diver glass. The Pearl Diver glass had its own manufacturer and history. Ben, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean, the research on this was a lot of fun and also kind of crazy because you can go down so many different directions. But yeah, so what Jeff Barry calls the Pearl Diver glass, because of course it was used by Don the Beachcomber in the Pearl Diver served in that bar. Obviously, that was a glass that already existed. Don was not manufacturing glassware in the 30s; he was buying it. And I do want to point out that tropical drinks in their heyday, whether it be in Cuba and the Caribbean or whether it was in California, in the early part of the last century, it was all glassware. There were no mugs being used at that time. Mugs come later. So for us, really, the glassware was more what we wanted to focus on. But yeah, there was in the Depression, there was a lot of domestically produced glassware, and there was a company called the Dunbar Glass Corporation in Dunbar, West Virginia, which made this Art Deco juice glass, really, that had the kind of characteristic ribbing of the Pearl Diver, and that was the glass. So it didn't have a name. It had just kind of catalog numbers, and I've looked at some of those catalogs from the 30s and looked through them, and it's just all the glasses had catalog numbers. But there was a glassware historian named Hazel Marie Weatherman who wrote a very influential book in the glass, so, hey, we're into cocktails. Some people are just into glasses, right?
Yeah.
And she wrote a book in which she gave the Dunbar glasses the names of the Three Musketeers. So there was, so she called the glass the Aramis. And that's how it's known in the glass world. So I actually was able to, I found all this stuff out because I tracked down, I tracked down a guy named Tom Felt, who runs the Dunbar, West Virginia Glass Museum, and he turned me on to Weatherman's book, which I have a copy of, and so it's fun, meeting people like that and interviewing people like that. You wouldn't think you would definitely necessarily be talking to a guy from West Virginia about 1930s glassware, but that's the kind of stuff we did. So we unearthed a little bit of history there. There's a lot of little tidbits like that through the book that are, they're not maybe gonna change the
Morgantown was
world.
another big glass manufacturer. Like they made the famous Derby daiquiri glass. But the Pearl Diver glass used to come in different shapes and even had a pitcher-sized version of it that you would make the large pitcher would pour into the smaller Pearl Divers. I mean, it's pretty incredible. I think long response to your question, but the aesthetics of the book, I think it was important for us to go back to that sort of original idea, like with Don, and you even see this at Tiki now, is like there were just certain cocktails that only had one glass, and back then when this genre was booming, it's they were going through some of these catalogs of Depression era glassware and saying, okay, if we just choose this one design for this one drink, it's going to make it a lot more special. And I started doing that also at Sunken Harbor Club, where our Pilsner glass only serves this one drink. That's it. And with a book, it becomes more special because you can find a vintage glass. Like the opening cocktail of the book is the Tropical Itch, and I borrowed a vintage Trader Vic Tortuga glass from our friend Adam Colasar, and I just wanted to do that because that design is really cool and it showed off the foam of the cocktail really well, and just impactful. So
if you are into glassware, I think this book might be the first ever, or certainly first in a long time. Every single cocktail photographed in the book is in a different glass. So every photo has unique glass, and it's all very well thought through. We had the great advantage of working with Nico Shinko, who's an amazing photographer, and Garrett and Nico and I, put a lot of time into how these photos look. But I think, most of the collection was from Garrett's own. There's a few from my collection, a few from that we borrowed, but the photos are great, partially because of that unique glassware approach.
And we shot everything
totally
on
agree.
location too, which not every cocktail book does. Which
and because
really
the book is not about a particular bar, we didn't have to showcase a bar in the sense that we were selling the location, but
Right.
we shot it in 4 different bars. And even though it's not about those spaces, we really wanted to show the idea of space. We didn't want these to be cocktails that were floating in the void. We wanted them to be, in a hospitable environment. And I think we found little interesting bits and pieces of backdrops. So, you don't even necessarily think, oh, it's that place again, because we found little different ways to show it off.
Sure.
Yeah, sometimes we shot in like the cabinet of the server station, and like found this weird little corner. There was Nico is very good
floor
at finding these strange little corners of all the locations we were in, which was Shea Zoo, Deer Irving on Hudson, Mr. Paradise, Gage and Tollner, and Sunken Harbor Club. So yeah,
very cool.
Yeah, that's always kind of fun to be with photographers and have them, like, I think I'm going to take a picture of this cocktail on the floor in this weird corner.
Yeah.
We love that.
They find the space and they make it work, and it looks gorgeous.
It was really fun because Garrett was very organized. He showed up. We shot over, I guess it was 4 days. Garrett, we shot over 4 days, and Garrett would come with several bags where he had little pre-batched bottles of cocktail, right? All of his equipment that he needed, and he would be setting up all of that stuff. Nico would be setting up the lighting, and essentially I would explore the space as a first pass and go around with our list of what drinks we were going to do that day, and make notes about let's try them in these spaces, and then I'd confer with the other gentlemen. That was a lot of fun. So yeah, finding those little spaces was really a cool part of it, and we were very lucky to work with those great bars.
I'm surprised you actually made the actual drink, because I've done a lot of styling for photo shoots, and there's a lot of hacks that you can use to
don't give away all the secrets, but more or less they weren't all exactly the drink, but they were close.
I did styling for before the pandemic, like right before the pandemic, for Chloe Frichette's Easy Tiki. I did about like a third of the styling for that book. And I saw like a little bit of their techniques, what they do at Punch, but there are, there's sometimes where you shoot and there is no alcohol in it, and there is a visual difference, especially with things like flash blending and frozen drinks. Sure. Sometimes hard to cheat that just because of like the structure of what those things are. But hey, I had some light spirits that I wanted to get rid of in my house, and I had some dark spirits I wanted to get rid of in my house.
Right.
And those worked very well. So
right.
Yeah.
I subscribe to the notion that, and this comes from my days working on the Food Network, everything we did on the show I was a part of was real. And same in the photographs in my book. And I'm glad to hear that about this book, is because if you take something and you style it, then your consumer tries to recreate it and it never quite looks the same, and they feel a failure on their part, right? We want to show what it is and how it looks, so that they can recreate.
And I think those textural aspects that Garrett
for sure
are the hardest to do without doing it correctly.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, for sure with things that are blended and shaken, but what about say stirred cocktails in that realm?
Yeah,
I mean that's where you can really get away with some cheating, because you're not really, as long as you take an atomizer with water in it and spritz it on the outside of the glass to make it look frosty, spray hairspray on the mint to make it stand up and not fall down, all those kinds of things. But actually, no, that's a good point, because I think that, I've always loved tropical drinks that are stirred and served neat, or on one big rock. And I know that, Sother, I mean, that's what you do.
Minus the tropical part, but yeah, that leads to this, how, if you guys could explain it a little, how can the tropical approach that you guys are using apply itself to the sort of savory and stirred world of cocktails?
Yeah, I think it was that whole chapter that those cocktails are in, I think was very important to us, of having a chapter where we discuss, okay, what does the genre not do well, and what should it do well in that regard? And the two big things were like savory, spicy, which, you know, in the previous decade was probably the most popular thing all three of us were making behind the bar. That's all that people wanted. And then, you know, stirred cocktails, which have had some, you know, have some roots. You know, there are things like the El Presidente, the Remember the Maine, which you know were Cuban stirred drinks that still remain today, that come from a tropical environment and have that flair to them. But I mean, we largely approached that chapter very similarly to how you know, design your menus, Sother, where it was like, okay, let's do some riffs on the Negroni, Manhattan / Martini, and Old Fashioned, and see if we can reference the flavor combinations and profiles that, you know, work in something like a swizzle or a sour, but then put them in that context rather than, you know, what they were being used in the 30s and 40s. I mean, the improved rum cocktail, which is later in the book, but is built like an improved cocktail from the 19th century. It just uses ingredients that are directly taken from an old Don the Beachcomber drink called the Beachcomber's Gold. So it's passion fruit, absinthe, almond, which we're using creme de noyau, but then it's built exactly the same, like an old 19th century whiskey drink. It just happens to then swap those things out and use that existing structure. But
That's
Ben,
cool.
I mean, I think Ben, when we were testing the drinks, I think you had the most fun tasting the stirred ones, right?
Well, it's just so new. I mean, when we were doing, you know, we've been on a little bit of a book and bar tour around the country in the last couple of months, and we always try to have quite a variety of drinks, different base spirits, different preparations. So there's always been stirred drinks on the menu, and at some of the events we've been doing, specifically one of Garrett's drinks called the Bay of Pigs, which I sort of explain as it's a Cuba Libre telescoped into an old fashioned format. So it's got the flavors you might associate. You know, it's got the lime, etc. But it's not coming from juice. And I always want people, especially if they're, you know, cognoscente, I like, try that one first, because I think it's really revelatory, just to see how that can be done. And everyone, you know, I think it's a connoisseur's drink. People seem to love that one. I love that one. It really shows the purpose of this book is to kind of push the boundaries a little bit. You know, we think of tropical drinks as being a big tent, that there's lots of ways something can be a tropical drink, as long as you're, you know, celebrating the produce of the tropics, which is all the best stuff anyway, and, you know, the history of the people who live there, who created a lot of these drinks initially. As long as you're achieving those things, it can be a tropical drink. So, you know, we love tiki drinks, but I think tiki is just like one of the streams. This is a whole, you know, torrent of many oceans together that makes up tropical drinks. And I think that stirred part of it is just something that people, you know, they think about tropical drinks as being rum and fruit juice on crushed ice, which is a delicious thing to drink, but there's a lot of other things that you can drink that are delicious and that can still have that tropical flair.
It's just reminding me of Garrett. I'm sure you have this recipe somewhere, but I was just thinking about one of the Monday Miller Tiki nights at Lani Kai. It was very, very late, and I was like, you know what I'd love to do? Make a hybrid of a Sazerac and a daiquiri called Sazeracery.
Sazeracery.
So we worked on it, and it was and we used like a lime cordial that he was making instead of a simple. You know, there was a bunch of different things, and I think it was rum and brandy, if I remember correctly. If you can find that recipe, I'm sure you have it written down somewhere. I can't find it. I've moved so many times since then, but it kind of falls in with that.
Yeah, it does. I think now there's like way more options to make that idea happen. Because in the book, I mean, there is that myth. I'm sure Sother, I'm sure you could speak to this. There's this myth that, you know, stirred drinks have no acidity, but it's like vermouth has acidity, right? Mm-hmm. If you use something like Tomler's tonic, which has like a lot of citric acid in it, but you know, now there's even more options to throw acidity into a stirred drink, because you can do things like lime cordial that's clarified, Don's mix, which we use in the Beachcomber Negroni in the book. And at Sunken Harbor Club, we actually make a Sazerac with Don's mix, which we call Don's Dram. So it's not too far from that idea,
cool.
David.
Right.
Nice.
Yeah,
sure
I mean, recently, during BCB, Chris Elford, who's a alum of Amore Amargo and now owns obviously Navy Strength out in Seattle, he popped over and we did sort of getting the band back together at the original room at Amore Amargo. He and I behind the bar making bitter, stirred, tropical inspired drinks. It was great fun. We made mango stora. We blended mango into Angostura.
Nice.
We did a bunch of fun, interesting things to bring some of those flavors into that stirred canon, and it was a ton of fun. Listen, guys, I feel like we could talk forever about this book, and I'm going to highly encourage all of our listeners to go out and get a copy. I see that you have an Instagram for the book itself called Tropical Standard Book on Instagram. You've got a Facebook that's Tropical Standard for people to find out what's going on and keep up with what you've got.
We also have a website, tropicalstandard.com, which is a good way. If you want to buy the book, it's available at any store. But if you go to tropicalstandard.com, there's some links that'll send you to some stores as well.
Yeah, right on. To purchase from the little guy. That's the approach that I always take.
Bookshop.org is a great place to start.
You got any upcoming dates you can mention? I know you guys are doing a tour of sorts. Yeah,
we've been all over the place. So now we're going into Tales of the Cocktail, as you mentioned. So we're doing a whole bunch of stuff. We'll be doing some signings at Tales. Garrett's also doing a presentation on Tuesday at Tales. But our big event is going to be Thursday at Tales, the 27th of July, from 4 to 6 at Palm and Pine, which is a beautiful American South and South American restaurant and bar. We'll be doing a few different cocktails from the book, and there'll be books for sale. So you can come and hang out with us and see what it's all about. So that's on Thursday the 27th from 4 to 6 at Palm and Pine. And if you look in your Tales official schedule, you can look for us and we'll be in there. But that'll be exciting. And I guess, Garrett, now we have to figure out how to make the Sazerac. That sounds very New Orleans to me, right? Nothing's more New Orleans than Sazerac plus daiquiri, right?
There's a part of me that thinks it'd be fun to make it like an ounce of Peychaud's and like a half ounce of rye whiskey and like do it upside down,
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah,
old and new, man.
Yeah, there you go.
That's called pulling a Giuseppe. I like it.
Yeah. Exactly.
Oh man! Well, hey guys, the book looks awesome. It's full of wonderful information. I know we barely scratched the surface of it, but go out and buy the book, people. And there's like a whole page on kind of the story of the lime, which I think is really important. I love little chapter breaks like that are super informative, and that's kind of information that goes a long way with not just us cocktail people, bartenders, but for people who are just fans of the cocktail, just to know more about it, because there's so much storied history, with these types of drinks and the spirits that go into them. But you're creating the new history, which is really cool, and so kudos to that end, because we need to constantly be checking what we're doing, checking our work, and evolving, and this is a really great way of doing it. And as you said, a category of cocktail styles that hasn't really been touched too much or updated in a very long time. So great job on this, guys, again. And thanks for being on the Speakeasy.
Yeah, thanks for having us. And also, if anyone is interested in tasting any drinks, there are a good number, and you're not at Tales of the Cocktail, there's a good number of drinks from the book at Sunken Harbor Club. So you can taste a Tijuana Taxi, a rum barrel, all sorts of lovely drinks from Tropical Standard there. So yeah,
amazing.
Yeah, it's a beautiful space too.
Yeah, that bar is gorgeous. You're fortunate to be helming that one. It's a gorgeous space. I love every time I go in there. I feel totally immersed because I feel submerged, I guess. Yeah. Well, that's it for this episode of the Speakeasy, guys. Thanks again for spending your time with us. Be sure to tune into Heritage Radio Network for plenty more shows just like this one. Click on the beating heart to donate and keep shows like us on the air. So that's it, everybody. Thanks so much, and cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.
Hope to have a drink with you soon.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So you don't charm the devil with your
The Speakeasy is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food and drink radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.
Hey there, I'm Lee Ullman here with some big news from the National Young Farmers Coalition. We're partnering with Heritage Radio Network on a special season of The Farm Report. It's all about what's happening with the Farm Bill and how it impacts farmers and eaters.
I am growing diversified vegetables on land that's been in our family for 150 years.
And so with the pandemic, gentrification, property values going up, we had to sell the land and we lost it.
Join us as we uncover the untold stories behind this massive piece of legislation that shapes how we grow our food, what we eat, and so much more.
The problems we have had, those are things that come from earlier Farm Bill and USDA policy, right? Like Earl Butts, get big or get out.
You know, it's my responsibility to know not only what I'm eating, but then like how that all came to be. And realize like, wow, like this piece of legislation, all this money, like it's technically something that I support as a taxpayer.
While Congress debates the next Farm Bill, this is not just an invitation to listen. It's a call to action. Be part of the conversation. Subscribe to the Farm Report on Heritage Radio Network, wherever you listen to podcasts.